What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of one of my personal favorite movies, Russ Meyer's Supervixens, which had its premiere in Dallas half a century ago. The film is the spiritual sequel to his 1968 smash hit Vixen, and the movie that represented a massive comeback for Mr. Meyer. For me, it's one of his most exciting films, right up there with Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but I must caution the unconverted. If you've never seen it, this is one of those movies that's so outrageously entertaining and so hysterically funny that after you see it, it's going to ruin the great majority of other movies out there not directed by Russ Meyer. They're going to come across to you as about as appealing as like dry, flavorless toast that's been left on the counter for a little bit too long. And luckily now, after decades of near total obscurity, the film is finally readily available. It's been really hard to find for a long time, but the good people over at Severin Films, they released a trilogy of Blu-rays of Vixen, Supervixens, and Beneath the Valley, the Ultra Vixens. They're not really a trilogy, apart from just having the word Vixen in the title, but people think of them as a trilogy. Actually, Supervixens is the beginning of a different trilogy. What is the term that some people use? There are some people out there that say that Supervixens is actually the beginning of his trilogy of Bastoons, and the reason they're called Bastoons is because they are busty movies, but they're very reminiscent of kind of like pop art and or cartoons, or like kind of like Looney Tunes from the 1940s. In any event, I first saw Supervixens in the theater back in 1999 at a Russ Meyer Film Festival where the great man himself was in attendance. And at that time, I really didn't know what to expect because the only movie of his I'd seen at that time, I think, was Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, which I saw on VHS with my friends back in college. And we were totally blown away, but I hadn't really been bitten by the bug yet. I hadn't become obsessed with Russ Meyer. But there's a moment very early on in Supervixens where the character known as Super Lola gets up and out of a car, and the way the camera's looking down at her, I was like, wait a second, I have a feeling I'm about to see something unlike anything that I've ever seen before. And shortly thereafter, I started laughing and laughing hard when the characters of Super Lola and Super Angel start talking trash to each other over the phone about the character Clint that they both have the hots for. But the dialogue was so outrageous, and the camera angles were so almost nightmarish. I mean, they're Dutch angles, but the style in which the story began to unfold, I'd never seen anything quite like it. And I basically laughed uproariously for the next hour and 40 minutes. My only criticism of Supervixens is that it kind of falls apart at the end. It kind of overstays its welcome with this ridiculously long action sequence involving dynamite. But otherwise, I had never seen a movie quite like it. But it's now my mission in life to expose Supervixens to more people. And I've shown it to my trainer, and I've shown it to my siblings. I've shown it to a lot of people, and usually they laugh like hell, just like I did. But for a long time, the only way you could watch it was either through a pirated copy or through this crummy little DVD. I shouldn't say crummy. I've cherished this DVD for a quarter of a century, but it's not worthy of the great man. But for a long time, the DVDs of Russ Meyer's movies were the only way to see. And this is the great majority of his filmography. But I guess Russ Meyer International or the Russ Meyer Estate, they were looking after the movies. And it seems like now they're finally allowing some people to kind of come in, clean up some of these old prints, and release them on Blu-ray, like Criterion. Criterion put out Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And as I've often said, this is a strong contender for the most entertaining movie ever made. John Waters might disagree. John Waters would say that Faster Pussycat Kill Kill is not only the best movie ever made, but the best movie that will ever be made. And I look forward to the day where somebody will restore Faster Pussycat Kill Kill and put that out on Blu-ray. And just to give you an idea of how much I like Faster Pussycat, I've got a poster for it right here, which is proudly displayed on my wall. But I feel like if you're going to start somewhere with his filmography, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill is a great place to start. Also because it kind of implodes the whole narrative about Russ Meyer's movies. Everybody always says, like, you know, you get all high and mighty and pretentious when discussing his work, but the reason you like it is because of the boobs. Like, stop bullshitting us, you like it because of the boobs. And of course, everybody likes boobs, but Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, while it has titillation, it doesn't have any nudity, so I feel like it's the best kind of defense for people who accuse us of just liking Russ Meyer's movies because of the nudity. But let's not kid ourselves. The nudity is a major part of the feature attraction, especially in Supervixens. Wrote the screenplay himself in like 8 days with a lot of help from his actors. And the final product is unlike any movie that you will ever see. And I'm going to do my best today to paraphrase some of the major bullet points when it comes to the behind the scenes of making the movie. But if you want the full story of the making of Supervixens, or the full story of Russ Meyer's career, you're going to have to get strong and buy these massive tomes, Russ Meyer, A Clean Breast. These books are so fucking heavy, you almost can't even read them. I mean, I'm sweating just putting the books down. But Russ Meyer, late in life, luckily put together a lot of his best pictures from behind the scenes, as well as a lot of excerpts from some of his favorite reviews. But in any event, I threw down my hard-earned money and bought Russ Meyer, A Clean Breast. It's a one-of-a-kind reading experience, because as much as Russ Meyer's known for his outlandish stories and all of his eye-popping visuals, his use of language is utterly unique. It's at once totally juvenile, but also has this Shakespearean grandiosity that it oftentimes kind of makes your brain feel like it's coming unglued as these two different styles kind of collide together. But as you watch his movies, pay attention to the voiceover narration and the language. Every once in a while, Russ Meyer shows off that he's got a love and reverence for the written word, in addition to a love and reverence for the obvious assets that his movies have to offer. But getting back to that Russ Meyer Film Festival that I attended back in 1999, I got to see a lot of his best movies during that festival, and that was the beginning of my love affair. And also, when he's there in person answering questions, he just has this completely infectious personality where you just can't help but fall in love with the guy. And I strongly recommend that everybody hunt down the episode of Jonathan Ross's Incredibly Strange Film Show, Season 1, Episode 5. It's heartbreakingly brief, and it's been kind of hard to find over the years. But if you buy these Blu-rays from Severin, it's included as part of the package, where you get to hear from the great man himself.
What was your first filmmaking experience?
Well, I shot movies at 8mm Univex camera, 995 f5.6 lens. Mother hawked her engagement ring to get it for me. The neighbors, the dogs, the chickens. My sister was a good subject.
Like I said earlier, it's been hard to find his movies in a satisfying format for a long time. And I should make a quick side note that all my clips that I'll be sharing throughout this video come from my inferior copy on DVD. However, this is getting a little nerdy for a second, but the DVD is in the 4:3 aspect ratio, but it's not pan and scan like we had back in the 80s and 90s, where they would basically chop off the sides and then pan across the image. It's actually the full image, and when you watch it in 1.85:1, as it was originally projected in the theater, it's actually cropping a little bit off the top and bottom. I've done a side-by-side comparison with my Xbox and my PlayStation, and I was comparing the framing of certain shots. If you want the full image, well, then luckily we have the DVD where you can see everything. But if you want it lovingly, beautifully restored, and also projected the way that it was supposed to be back in the 1970s, it actually was projected in 1.85:1. So pick your poison, but luckily we have an embarrassment of riches between the two formats. But like I said before, most of my clips throughout this video will come from the DVD, but any clips that you see in 1.85:1 come from the trailers that Severin posted on YouTube. But back to the matter at hand, for a long time I've been planning on doing a giant Russ Meyer filmography video, but the subject matter is so colossal and so gargantuan and just so unwieldy that I didn't feel up to the task, because I just kind of start going crazy when I start talking about Russ Meyer's career. And maybe I'll tackle his entire filmography down the road. In any case, the 50th anniversary for Supervixens is the perfect opportunity to kind of do a video on his career in more or less a bite-sized chunk that's more a little bit more manageable. But let's just start with the obvious. I fucking love this movie. I love it unironically, unapologetically. Nothing annoys me more when somebody claims to be a Russ Meyer fan, but they talk about his movies in a condescending way with a kind of a wink, like, oh, we know this is totally silly and depraved and blah, blah, blah. We don't really like these movies. I love these movies unreservedly, because there's never been another filmmaker quite like him before or since. He kind of stands alone in the annals of film history. But rather than use my own inadequate words to try and persuade the unconverted to watch this movie, a movie that is one of the most hysterical and also at times one of the most savagely violent movies of the 1970s, and there's plenty of healthy competition on that front. But I'm going to read you the voiceover narration from the full-length trailer to the movie. And the full-length trailer It's been kind of hard to find over the years. It's close to 2 minutes. There's oftentimes like the 1 minute version, but it doesn't have all the voiceover narration. And I would simply play the trailer in full. However, there's a ton of nudity scattered throughout it. And just as a creative challenge, I decided early on I'm not going to use any nudity in this video. I'll probably still get slapped with an 18+ restriction on YouTube. But I'm going to work in good faith on my end, and also I feel like if I don't include any of the nudity in this video, that'll incentivize people to hunt down the movie, because they're going to be like, what is all this nudity that you keep talking about? Well, rent the movie on Apple, rent the movie on Amazon, or buy the Blu-ray and discover it for yourself. However, here is the voiceover from the trailer. Russ Meyer, the rural Fellini, serves up a colossal motion picture geared for the young and old alike. A sophisticate in the blue collar, a motion picture born to entertainment. Vibrant, spellbinding, jarring, rocking, gut-wrenching, yet so hilariously funny in its delivery. Russ Meyer's Supervixens, an all-out assault on today's sexual mores and more. A frontal attack against women's lib, blasting through the male machismo syndrome, kicking the crap out of conventions, hang-ups, convictions, obsessions, the whole bag. Cops, robbers, sexually aggressive females, rednecks, sick men of war, unfaithful wives, impotence, bedroom prowess, the 32-second orgasm, cuckolding, the wrist bazooka, momism, breast fixation versus fellatio, racing cars, self-abuse, even death and reincarnation. Sorry, I can't even get through this. Russ Meyer Supervixens, a cinematic smorgasbord of mind-boggling beauty, 6 of the most bountiful women in the world. Yes, 6 incredible broads served up from the lusty table of Russ Meyer. Russ Meyer Supervixens. Feast on it. I mean, holy moly. I don't know if there's ever been a trailer that has better voiceover than the trailer for Supervixens. And I've seen a lot of great trailers with voiceover. In the 1980s, nearly every trailer had voiceover. They're like, in a time where things are hardcore, blah, blah, blah. But holy moly, just like I mentioned earlier, there is a love and reverence for the written word and or just old-fashioned phrases that you only encounter in the world of Russ Meyer.
You can't make a thoroughbred out of a jackass.
And when you're listening to Russ Meyer's commentary track, which is on the Blu-ray, or watching the interviews with him, he has so many colorful phrases that he whips out that I want to try to employ in my own language. Like when he describes a man taking off his clothes, he doesn't say he took off his clothes. He says, dropped his laundry. Like, oh yeah, he dropped his laundry. I'm like, all right, that's one way of saying it. Or when he's discussing a man struggling with impotence, he doesn't say, oh, he can't get it up. He says, oh, he can't shoot his lump. I'm like, can't shoot his lump. First and foremost, that's disgusting, but also hilarious. And so I love his attention to detail when it comes to unique phrases that you only hear in his films. And speaking of his unique phrases, I transcribed that entire pitch on the trailer just by listening to it. While there's like car crashes and bonkers sound effects and crazy music, it's kind of tough to hear, but the word momism, I wasn't 100% convinced I got it right, but then I looked it up. Apparently the word momism means excessive attachment to or domination by one's mother, which kind of fits into Russ Meyer's filmography or his overall world, but you tell me. Check out the trailer and see if that word momism, if I got that right or not. But at this point, you might be justifiably asking yourself, what the hell is this movie about that I keep rambling on and on about? Not to worry, I won't give away any spoilers until much deeper into the video, and I'll also include a time code down below for when the spoilers begin. But for now, I'm just trying to pique the curiosity of people who might not have ever seen a movie by Russ Meyer. I mean, in the 1960s and 1970s, his movies did big business, but they've just been mostly out of circulation in the decades since. So we're going to claw Russ Meyer back from the from kind of the back bends of history. But the official premise, ripped straight from IMDb for this movie, is a hapless gas station attendant is forced to go on the run after his unfaithful wife is murdered by a psychopathic cop and encounters a bevy of busty babes until he meets his ideal woman. And I should add that this gas station attendant doesn't encounter just any babes. These are Russ Meyer's superwomen, women of incredible pectoral pulchritude, or as my grandfather used to say, they have a severe case of arthritis. But I'm talking about Super Angel, Super Lorna, Super Kaji, Super Cherry, Super Soul, Super Eula, and of course, Super Vixen herself, played by the legendary Shari Eubank. And I just think it's totally marvelous and inspired and deranged that all the women in this movie all have the first name Super, or at least the nickname Super, attached to what is otherwise, like a stripper name like Cherry or Soul or whatever the case might be. But I've never read any of the stories by Horatio Alger, but my understanding is that Russ Meyer was kind of following a Horatio Alger kind of format or structure with this story, where you've basically got an innocent young man hitting the road with nothing but his integrity and his honor to kind of guide him and protect him. And in the case of this movie, he finds himself constantly being preyed upon by either hungry, sexually aggressive women and or violent sociopaths.
You're goddamn angel! See now? Hey, that's my girl, my lovers, my groovy
But as is always the case with Russ Meyer's best movies, the story is almost immaterial. It's his personal style that makes the movie worth watching. And I'm going to do my best to summarize as succinctly as possible the kind of key ingredients of his style, but no one said it better than his friend and collaborator, Roger Ebert, who, in addition to being a celebrity film critic, also co-wrote a lot of Russ Meyer's best movies. But in the documentary by Jonathan Ross, The Incredibly Strange Film Show, Season 1, Episode 5, Roger Ebert had the following to say.
But apart from that, he also likes this comic strip kind of Little Abner, larger-than-life, slapstick kind of universe that he has created. And the Russ Meyer universe is as distinctive as the universe of any other artist of our time. You can look at 5 seconds of a Russ Meyer picture and know that it's a Russ Meyer picture.
And I feel like in an art form that is dominated by the visual style, the most famous practitioners of this art form that we all love, I can't think of any higher praise than what Roger Ebert just said about the great Russ Meyer. But there's one key ingredient to Russ Meyer's style where he almost completely, totally stands alone as a filmmaker, because he pretty much does it all. With Supervixens, he wrote the script, he directed the movie, he produced the film, he shot the film, and he edited the movie all by himself. And on all of his movies, except for perhaps Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, his crews were notoriously small. And if you were an actor on one of his movies and you weren't willing to lug a tripod up the side of some rocky mountain in the desert, you wouldn't last long on his crew, because he was famous for his physically demanding shoots way out in the desert where he had total freedom, total control, and he liked maintaining basically military discipline on his sets with his cast and crew, and how there was no funny business allowed. He enjoyed keeping his actors kind of perpetually pent up and turned on and sexually hungry but unsatisfied, because he felt like it would kind of inform the scenes in the movie.
I mean, there's no turn on. Everything I do is a turn on for me. I'm aroused when I'm shooting. There's no question about it.
But I just find it hilarious that in spite of the completely inappropriate subject matter of a lot of his movies, that on the set he maintained basically strict military discipline. But that's because he learned his filmmaking technique and his craft as a combat photographer in World War II. The best time he ever had, as he says. But while in the Army Signal Corps, he was taught by Arthur Lloyd, who taught him the basics of directing. And Lloyd was famous for holding up 5 fingers, which stood for long shot, medium shot, close up, insert, reestablish the action. And if you watch Russ Meyer's movies from the early 60s up through the late 70s, you can see him falling back on that technique over and over and over again. He learned those lessons well, and during World War II, Russ Meyer quickly developed a reputation for kind of terrifying his crew, because he was always trying to get as close to the action, as close to the combat as humanly possible. And you can feel that kind of attraction to violence and danger throughout pretty much all of his movies. But when he returned to the U.S., Russ Meyer found work as a glamour photographer, which leads to yet another major influence on his overall style of storytelling. Playboy. In the early days of Playboy, I'm talking like the mid-50s, when Hugh Hefner was just a young entrepreneur. But Russ Meyer shot some incredible pictorials for him back in the day, including with his future wife and business partner, Eve Meyer. And if you want to see a sample of the work, hunt down the June issue from 1955. Those shots of the lovely Eve Meyer were all shot by Russ Meyer himself. But if I tried to boil it down to what are the key influences on Russ Meyer's style, I would not mention any other filmmaker. I would say World War II and Playboy and his own unique worldview. And that's how we get this kind of bizarre, high-octane style of storytelling.
This here's a young man that misfortune befell. Name of Clint Ramsey. 2 vicious highwaymen waylaid him, robbed him, and left him to perish in the cruel desert.
Wie geht's, mein Herr?
Ah, Soul, you must speak English in front of our young guest. Now, see to his wounds, wife.
Ja, ja.
Watching his movies, you'll notice that his camera almost never moves at all. He's got a ton of setups and a ton of crazy angles and this rapid-fire editing style that gives his films this propulsive sense of forward momentum. But the camera doesn't budge at all, and that's because he had no crew. If you don't have a crew, it's very difficult and labor-intensive to lay down a track to slide your camera along. It was much easier for him just to have a ton of setups. And sometimes he would have as many as 200 or 300 setups per day. And as you're watching his movies, it's just cut with all these crazy angles. But the style of storytelling, it's unmistakably his. And I just absolutely love and adore it. And when you watch his movies, one of the reasons that his style is so immediately recognizable is that nobody shot their movies like Russ Meyer. So your style can't look like Russ Meyer unless you're shooting like Russ Meyer. And once again, in a visual art form where style is everything, I can't think of higher praise to give to a filmmaker. But don't take my word for it. Let's hear it from legendary screenwriter William Goldman from his book, Adventures in the Screen Trade. I bought this bad boy, I think summer of 2000, and read it on the set of Hannibal, because you have a lot of downtime on movie sets. But William Goldman, he wrote Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He wrote The Princess Bride, Marathon Man. He also was a really highly paid ghostwriter, but did a lot of successful Stephen King adaptations. He's a legend, but in his book, he's having this big debate about auteur filmmaking and to what degree are films a collaborative art form, to what degree are certain directors basically the author of their movies. And if you want to hear Russ Meyer read this passage himself, it's included in the Jonathan Ross Incredibly Strange Film Show. But I can't include the entire clip because I'll get nailed for copyright, because it's a very long clip. But I'm going to try to do my best to read it in Russ Meyer's style, or actually that's impossible. I'll read it in my style. But here's what he had to say. Is there, then, no American auteur director? Perhaps there's one man who thinks up his own stories and produces his pictures and directs them too, and also serves as his own cinematographer. Not to mention he also does his own editing. All of this connected with an intensely personal and unique vision of the world. That man is Russ Meyer. I can't wait for Truffaut's book about him. So yeah, I'm glad I hung on to this book. If you ever want to read just a great novel, not a novel, a nonfiction book about the trials and tribulations of being a screenwriter in Hollywood, but also pulling it off and being very successful, Adventures in the Screen Trade is fantastic. I wish William Goldman and Russ Meyer had a chance to work together. In any case, getting back to the subject at hand, let's talk a little bit about the nudity in Supervixens, because I think the sex and nudity, etc., sometimes are a major stumbling block for some people seeing Russ Meyer for the distinctive, unique storyteller that he was. But I need to emphasize this very clearly. Russ Meyer's movies are not porn. He didn't frown on porn, he didn't avoid porn, but he wasn't interested in creating porn. And the major distinction between his movies and full-blown pornographic movies, like XXX movies in the 1970s, they would play at the porn theaters. And the porn theaters had full penetration, like all the stuff you see on all the websites like Xvideos today. Russ Meyer's movies could play in regular theaters. In the 1970s, you could release X-rated movies at a regular theater. Like before theaters kind of got sucked into malls and became more family friendly. Like think back to Midnight Cowboy, which won Best Picture. Midnight Cowboy was X-rated. It's not a porn film. It's just X-rated for kind of the extreme subject matter. The X rating did kind of change over time, but in the 1970s, when Russ Meyer was making some of his best movies, X just meant something slightly different. So there's tons of nudity, but he wanted to make big bucks playing in regular theaters for mainstream audiences. And to put it in context, his one of his biggest early successes was his film Vixen, which I think it's Elgin. Is it Illinois or Indiana? Where the hell is Elgin? Hang on one sec. I've got too many notes. This is my filmography notes, and so Elgin, Illinois. Vixen played for 58 weeks straight. That town had 14,000 people. Like, can you imagine how many times those people must have watched the movie Vixen over and over and over again at a time where the subject matter was, let's say, it was brand new for a lot of people. Vixen's a pretty wild movie, and I love and adore it. But that was the kind of business that Russ Meyer's movies could do when he struck gold. And I'm always impressed by filmmakers who can work with very small budgets and strike gold. And depending upon who you believe, Supervixens was shot for anywhere between $100,000 and $400,000. Like Russ Meyer will say that he kind of amplified the numbers for like tax reasons or accounting reasons back in the 1970s, but the true budget was $100,000. In terms of box office, Supervixen generated, if you believe Wikipedia, generated 17 million. If you believe Russ Meyer, generated 18 million. But think about that. Like these days, movies are lucky if they gross twice what their budget is. Russ Meyer was making movies for, if we take him at his word, a movie for $100,000. So that would be a 180 times return on his initial investment. This is why Russ Meyer retired a very, very wealthy man. But it's all well and good to talk about art and artistry and, you know, all these wonderful, beautiful topics when it comes to the world of independent film. But Russ Meyer is one of the few independent filmmakers who really became obscenely wealthy by going that route. But Supervixens is a true return to form with all the well-built women, all the Herculean men that you could ever ask for, and it's also just funny as fucking shit. Like, his best movies tend to offer a pretty heavy form of social commentary or observations about small town life in America, or what it means to be quintessentially American. And you'll see it with like there's like a lengthy chunk of text at the beginning of Harry, Cherry, and Raquel, where he's talking about censorship and American values and freedom of speech, with like, you know, images of like jet planes taking off and like construction, but also incredibly beautiful women. You're like, wait a second, what's going on here? But like, his commentary, often in the form of voiceover narration, especially in Up and Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, it has a very high moral tone, or like strong moral fiber, which seems to be in direct contrast with all the sweaty sequences on squeaky brass beds, you know, oftentimes with like, you know, lovemaking being shot like through the bed springs, which doesn't even make sense logically. They're on a mattress, but the mattress just disappears, and he likes getting these shots from underneath through the bed springs. But it's that strange contrast in high moral tone, as well as like softcore pornography, that creates this unique worldview. But with Supervixens, you have to kind of go looking for that commentary, because there's no Greek chorus kind of spelling it out like he would use in Up and Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens.
But I'll tell you something, son. Anyone that would harm a hair on her pretty head, just one hair, would answer to this. I didn't raise her just to have some young scallywag come along and take advantage of her handicap.
But I guess if you're looking for like a key takeaway or a moral to the story of Supervixens, it seems to be pretty meat and potatoes in his worldview. That simply working in a diner or working in a gas station and then coming home at night to a woman who loves you, like that is the key to health and happiness. But along the way, the main character Clint has to endure or experience a variety of pretty wild, extreme adventures, because he has to go up against the great Charles Napier. So let's pause for a second and talk about the legendary actor Charles Napier as Harry Sledge, easily the most overt psychotic villain in all of Russ Meyer's movies. And Charles Napier had been in the military, so he got along famously with Russ Meyer. Their whole attitude towards work and productivity and acting, etc., they were very much in lockstep. And Charles Napier had been kind of plucked from obscurity to make Harry, Cherry, and Raquel, a movie that I strongly recommend. But he'd gotten so demoralized about the movie business, he'd kind of, I think he was working for a magazine as a writer. He was doing something totally outside the world of movies, but Russ Meyer lured him back, or seduced him back to play the villain in Supervixens. And he's so goddamn good and so terrifying and so charismatic that none other than Alfred Hitchcock, who apparently loved this movie, put him under contract afterwards. And this movie completely, totally changed his life. I mean, Charles Napier, once again, he had retired from movies. He works in Supervixens. Hitchcock discovers him. And Hitchcock, of course, was toward the end of his career at that point, but he still had a big production company. And getting put under contract by the master of suspense, that was big. The gist of this story, or the inciting event that kind of sets the whole story in motion, is that Super Angel, also played by Shari Eubank, is a, let's just say, little high maintenance, a little intense, and fiercely jealous and territorial and possessive of her man Clint. They have this horrible fight where she's basically beating the crap out of him and attacking his truck with an axe and just going completely as berserk as a goddamn wildcat. But Harry Sledge shows up, kind of misinterprets what's happening, and Harry Sledge is a cop. He knocks out Clint, puts him in the cooler, lets him cool off a little bit. But while Clint's off kind of nursing his wounds and having a few drinks with Super Kaji, frequent collaborator with Russ Meyer. Kaji, I think, was in 5 Russ Meyer movies, or maybe 6. In any case, Harry Sledge and Super Angel decide to have a little date behind Clint's back.
Do you want to dance?
No, I never could hack it.
Do you mind if I do?
Why, hell no.
And I think at this point in the video, this is when I have to start going into spoiler territory. So this is going to be my first and only warning about plot details. 3, 2, 1, last warning. But this scene is what makes Supervixens stand alone in the filmography of Russ Meyer. I was listening to a video earlier today where Quentin Tarantino Just going on and on about Supervixens and how impressed he was by basically the first hour and 20 minutes, and less so impressed by the very end. But I agree, the ending runs out of gas. But this scene, the way Tarantino described it, he said it plays out like one of the craziest one-act plays that you've ever seen, with one of the great violent scenes of the 70s. A scene that's on par with anything you might see from Straw Dogs or Deliverance. So there it is, Tarantino, who loves the 70s, placing this movie on the same level as Sam Peckinpah and John Borman. But this lengthy date scene between Super Angel and Harry Sledge is just absolutely fascinating, because it's like the best date you could ever possibly imagine. Initially, Harry's smoking a cigar, watching her dance, they're talking dirty, they're getting turned on. But then, of course, when the magic's supposed to happen, Harry can't get it up. And in the movie, Harry has the world's biggest dildo to represent his member. And apparently Charles Napier, in addition to being a good actor on the set, one of his duties was he was really good at painting these dildos. Apparently, Russ Meyer said that was his secret job description. But he would get into coloring the veins and all kinds of stuff. But he can't get it up on the date. He's visibly straining.
Come on, Harry, I'm ready.
I'm not.
It's like, oh, he's in agony, trying unsuccessfully to perform with the lovely Super Angel. And because Super Angel has got a bit of a mouth on her and likes to talk a little shit, she decides to let Harry have it. The same way she lets Clint have it earlier in the movie, she proceeds to let Harry have it. However, unlike Clint, who's an all-around kind of nice guy, Harry's a psychopath, and things get very violent very quickly. But it's a long, long sequence where Super Angel locks herself in the bathroom. Of course, once again, Harry, because he's impotent, not only can he not get it up, he can't even get a goddamn door open, and he's trying the doorknob with a knife. And
what's the matter, Super Stud Harry? All your other muscles gone limp too.
He eventually goes completely fucking psycho. And once again, the scene just goes on and on and on. And all the major violence of the scene, it's always just out of frame, but it involves Harry jumping up and down and stomping. What's crazy about this scene is how throughout his entire career, Russ Meyer was always fighting censorship of the nudity in his movies. This was the one time where different cuts of his movie would have this scene cut out entirely. I think in the UK and at certain film festivals, basically certain territories would remove this violent sequence, because even though it's all out of frame, your imagination fills in the gaps, and it just comes across as so horrific and so brutal. And it ends in a way that I can only describe as a mix of science fiction and the supernatural, because he finishes her off with the electrocution and burning the house down. But by virtue of that electrocution death, she's able to be reincarnated later on, or maybe I'm just interpreting it that way. But in any case, Super Angel, who is evil and mean, gorgeous, but has a dark side, she gets reincarnated later on in the movie as Super Vixen, who's nothing but love, nothing but affection, just a total sweetheart. And I've seen this movie I don't know how many times now. I still can't quite wrap my head around what the hell Russ Meyer was doing with this whole reincarnation angle, because in the latter part of the movie, you basically have the first part of the movie play itself out all over again. But Clint doesn't recognize Super Vixen as Super Angel in spite of them being identical. And Harry doesn't recognize Clint in spite of them having a lot of interactions.
You looking for some action?
Yeah, maybe. Hey, where's the growler?
The what?
The shit house.
Oh, it's around back.
Initially, they all seem to not understand that they've gone through this before. But then at some point, without the film ever telling you when, where, or how, they all start to recognize each other again, and they have this big battle on a mountaintop involving the wrist bazooka and dynamite and all this crazy shit. I'm not entirely sure that Russ Meyer even fully thought out this reincarnation angle and why nobody seems to recognize one another. Or if he did think it out, he didn't really seem to care about it all that much. But somehow there's a weird supernatural logic to the movie that does work upon repeated viewings, but it's hard to verbally articulate. And as they're starting to recognize each other again, Super Vixen will use certain lines that she used as Super Angel back at the beginning of the movie. Like she makes a reference to Harry and his cigar and how she likes a cigar too, but she takes it out of her mouth every once in a while. It's totally bizarre, and it just it defies narrative logic.
I like an occasional cigar too, but I take it out of my mouth once in a while.
That's pretty good, huh, Harry?
As wild as this framing device is, with the beginning and the end dominated by Harry, Clint, and Super Angel, aka Supervixen, having this giant battle for the fate of all human civilization and love and harmony and happiness and all that stuff. It's the adventures that Clint has in the middle of the movie while he's on the run from the law because he gets framed for the murder. That's where this movie for me really comes to life, because he just has one strange adventure after another, and they're just an absolute fucking blast to watch. Like his first big adventure, once again, this is like I said before, it's like a Horatio Alger story where an innocent young man is on the road encountering all these criminals and ne'er-do-wells, but he bumps into Super Cherry and basically Superwoman from Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, Z-Man from Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. But they first they try to seduce him, and they're trying to get into his pants. But when he turns them down because he's innocent, they end up beating the crap out of him and robbing him.
Like I was saying, how does my beautiful bod look today?
Dynamite, baby, dynamite.
And because of this scene with Super Cherry and her boyfriend is so eager to share her, because they basically rob Clint and leave him for dead on the side of the road, that invites or opens up my favorite part of the movie by far, where Russ Meyer regular, Stuart Lancaster, and the lovely or legendary Yushi Dygard, who's a very famous adult performer, step into the story. And basically for the next 10 or 15 minutes, this is perhaps the best filmmaking of Russ Meyer's career, or at least in my opinion. This scene blows my mind each and every single time.
I guess Soul's doing her chores.
La 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 la.
Yeah, I see her coming now. Yes, sir. Nothing like a woman around the house to keep a body happy.
And I should add that Yushi Dygard was one of Russ Meyer's favorite people, because when Russ Meyer's mother, whom he had tremendous affection for, late in life when she was struggling to look after herself and bathe herself and that sort of thing, Yushi Dygard stepped in to basically nurse Russ Meyer's mother and look after her in her failing years. And Russ Meyer also had another reason to love Yushi Dygard, and I got to find the exact quote. And hang on one sec, I got to find my notes on the commentary section. But as Russ Meyer is watching the movie and reminiscing about his love and affection for Yushi Dygard, he says that she is still virile decades later. My mother always says it's viral, but for me, viral is like a viral infection. Virile is when you are still, fully functional sexually. But he says that Yushi Dygard was the most aggressive sex partner anyone could ever hope to find. And in the world of Russ Meyer, where he interacted with a lot of kind of titanic Amazonian women, that is high praise, because she's obviously got plenty of healthy competition on that front. And he says her whole life was devoted to screwing him. Like, all right, I guess if you're going to be known for something, having your whole life be devoted to screwing is one thing you can carve on your gravestone. But he said that when they were shooting certain scenes, she wasn't necessarily a good actress. She was a great performer, but not a good actress, and she didn't quite know how to fake it. And so if you were going to get a close-up of her face as she's screaming in pleasure, she wanted a man out of frame doing the business with her. And apparently many of her male co-stars were more than happy to help her out on that front.
Milking the cow, are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Luke told me to pitch some hay.
Yeah, yeah.
There's never been a performer before or since quite like Yushi Dygard. And if you were to put a gun to my head and say, who is your favorite adult performer or porn star from any era, the two biggest contenders would always be Yushi Dygard and or Brigitte Lahaye, if I'm saying her last name correctly. But there's something about those two icons. They really set my imagination ablaze. This whole chapter involving Stuart Lancaster and Yushi Dygard is just absolutely fucking one of a kind. You've got all the great high moral tone I was talking about earlier from the point of view of Stuart Lancaster, talking about the virtues of hearth and home and domestic bliss and hard work and spending time with his wife and that sort of thing. It's priceless. And meanwhile, Yushi Dygard is attacking Clint at every available opportunity. Anytime Stuart Lancaster has got his back turned, she's just physically assaulting him in the bedroom at night or physically assaulting him in the barn. It's bananas. And she's smothering him and suffocating him, and she's all over him. And it just makes me scream with laughter each and every single time. And Stuart Lancaster was a frequent collaborator of Russ Meyer. He was in Mudhoney. He was in Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. He was in Good Morning and Goodbye, which is kind of a movie that some people sleep on, but it's worth watching. He was in The 7 Minutes. You can skip that one, or anyway, if you're looking for the Russ Meyer experience, don't start with 7 minutes. Then obviously Supervixens, and he comes back for Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, which is probably the best work of his career, where he's kind of the Greek chorus and narrator of the story, describing all the virtues of small-town life. But Stuart Lancaster, according to Russ Meyer, was a bit of a dirty old man. And Russ Meyer talks about him quite a bit on the commentary track for the Blu-ray. But he talks about how, in spite of being a dirty old man, he was an aging gentleman at that time. And Russ has some line where he's like, I had to try to keep him away from the pussy because I worried he'd have a heart attack and it might end up killing him. I don't know if those fears were justified. But once again, on Russ Meyer's sets, he liked to keep everybody very chaste and virginal because he wanted everybody to be turned on because, once again, he thought it would inform the emotions of the scene. But Stuart Lancaster, he does get to have some wild scenes with Yushi Daigard in this movie. So at least Stewart got to go right up to the edge of heart attack territory in a few scenes in Supervixens. Now, I've been going quite a bit at this point where I feel like I've said most of what I came here to say, but let me just scroll through my notes to see if there's anything else I want to talk about. All right, let's talk about shooting fast and cheap out in the desert, because obviously these were low-budget movies with a very small crew, and Russ Meyer loved to exhaust people by driving around looking for exotic locations. He always loved looking for mountaintops that people could have sex on the top of, or lovely streams for his Garden of Eden sequences. I don't know if any filmmaker alive has ever, like before or since, has ever shot more sequences in the desert of nude young couples kind of walking around in a state of bliss, almost like, once again, like Adam and Eve. And Supervixens has a lot of those sequences, but, Up's got those sequences. Cherry, Harry, and Raquel's got those sequences. But he loved finding these unique locations out in the middle of nowhere and unleashing his actors with full frontal nudity. I mean, even Charles Napier and Harry, Cherry, and Raquel, you see his ding-a-ling flying all around. Like, as much as people talk about the big boobs in Russ Meyer movies, you see the ding-a-ling quite a bit. I mean, I'm starting to ramble and kind of zigzag just because I've run out of notes. There's one real penis in this movie, Supervixens, and a lot of big giant fake dildos. Clint's got a big giant fake dildo. Harry's got a big giant fake dildo. But there's one scene with a bodybuilder, a weightlifter, who randomly shows up in a scene with Super Eula, where he actually is packing the genuine article. And I should mention that Super Eula, I don't know if Russ Meyer's ever cooked up a more unusual character than Super Eula, because she pretends to be mute and she communicates with sign language, but she's constantly dancing to like old-fashioned Dixieland jazz. And her father, who's white, they never explain that, communicates angrily with her in sign language. But it comes right at like the 2/3 mark of the movie where, like, is it possible for this movie to get any stranger? And the answer is yes, because after that scene is when we get into reincarnation and that sort of thing. But I couldn't get through this movie without giving a shout out to the lovely Super Eula. But getting back to shooting in the desert, apparently Russ Meyer just really loved that style of filmmaking. He found that the crisp, dry air of the desert to be kind of invigorating and bracing. He liked filmmaking to be kind of an athletic endeavor, and a lot of actors would say after shooting with Russ Meyer, they almost felt like they had done like an Outward Bound experience or something along those lines. And when it came to grabbing locations, he would go into these small towns in Arizona and he would walk up to a house and say, I've got $25 here. Can we shoot in your house for a couple hours? Or I got $25. Can we shoot in the backyard of your barn for a few hours? And oftentimes they wouldn't get permission at all. And then by the time people had shown up to kind of say, what are you doing here? Like, you're not allowed to film here. Boom. His small, lightweight crew would be off to the next location. And he would drive people crazy just by driving them into physical exhaustion. But he just loved having everybody exercise, lugging gear around out into the desert. He just thought it was a very pure way to go about filmmaking.
Well, yeah, I like to shoot under those. I like the desert. I like the dry air. It's very invigorating. I like the idea of having things hard. I don't like it to be easy. I like to slog up a mountain and carry the camera myself.
It's funny, now that I think about it, Russ Meyer is probably as closely associated with and affiliated with some of these desert scenes out in the middle of nowhere as John Ford is with his famous Monument Valley, where he shot so many of his best westerns like The Searchers. Like John Ford and Russ Meyer, I don't know how much they would have in common. I mean, they both had a love and reverence for the military, but obviously John Ford had a much more kind of old-fashioned sensibility. I love John Ford. I got nothing but respect for John Ford, but I would love to have like in my mind just like what would have happened if John Ford and Russ Meyer never sat down just to have a drink together, because they both also enjoyed drinking. But I do think it's an interesting parallel or source of comparison how John Ford is so closely associated and affiliated with his version of the desert, and Russ Meyer is so closely affiliated with his version of the desert. But as a way of starting to bring this video to a close, let's come full circle back to the unique tropes of the world of Russ Meyer. And I've mentioned the high moral tone of the narration and/or Greek chorus, and I've mentioned all of its Dutch angles and his rapid-fire editing style, and I've mentioned his love of language, like when Harry asks, "Where's the growler?" and like, "Huh? Like the shit house?" Like only Russ Meyer knows how to use words in that way.
Hey, where's the growler?
The what?
The shit house.
Oh, it's around back.
But I think what I love about Russ Meyer's style overall, and I'm going to get to a list of my favorites in just a second, but he has a unique way of adding inserts and cutaways to his scenes that kind of add a sexual flavor to otherwise mundane objects. And what am I talking about? Like I was watching Up earlier today, and there's a beautiful woman working in a diner where they're serving bacon and eggs. And she's walking around showing off her body. Then they cut away to 2 eggs frying in a pan, but they're kind of jiggling. And the way they're jiggling, you're like, oh my God, like only Russ Meyer would look at 2 eggs frying in a pan and try to make them jiggle like they're boobs. Or the way he'll cut away to cars crashing into each other when people are having sex in a hot tub. I think that's either, is that Good Morning and Goodbye, or what was that movie? Hang on, let me scroll up. I think it's Finders, Keepers, Lovers, Weepers. It's either that or Good Morning and Goodbye, but there's a scene where 2 people are having sex underwater, and it keeps cutting away to like a demolition derby with all these cars crashing together. Once again, Russ Meyer finds a way to turn cars crashing into the most sexual thing you can imagine. And it's violent, and it's humorous, and it's colorful, and it's cartoonish. And so once again, there's never been a filmmaker quite like him. Or one of the best scenes from Supervixens, Clint and Supervixen are getting it on while Harry's kind of plotting and scheming about how he's going to ruin their lives. But while the couple's enjoying, bliss in heaven in the sack, Harry is smoking a cigar in bed, and he keeps kind of like going in and out of his mouth and that sort of thing. It's the most sexual thing you've ever seen. And the music swelling. The music in Russ Meyer's movies is bananas. What it reminds me of is like an old-fashioned strip club where you might get a stand-up comedian and a little jazz music, like an old-fashioned burlesque show that you might have seen like in the late 50s or early 60s, where you got like a big old tenor saxophone honking away. But yeah, the scores in Russ Meyer's movies, it's funny, he's so like old-fashioned and square in a lot of ways, but every once in a while he would try to pretend to be kind of hip and with it, like in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. He's using all this kind of like late 60s pop music and that sort of thing, but you always get the sense that maybe he doesn't fully understand it. He's such a bizarre set of contrasts in his style where he's both old-fashioned and progressive all at once, or once again, squeaky clean and very moral, but at the same time semi-pornographic. And so it's through these contrasts that a unique worldview starts to come into being. But as a way of just fully wrapping up this video, because I'm starting to lose my voice, I'm going to tell you my favorite movies by Russ Meyer so that you can do your homework and become as big a fan of his work as I am. And if you're a diehard fan of his work, of course you're going to eventually see all of his movies. But in the 1960s, perhaps his best movies, or at least according to Roger Ebert, would be his Gothic Quartet, which includes Lorna, Mudhoney, Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, and Motorpsycho. Those movies, while there's a little bit of titillation kind of scattered throughout, they're actually not, they don't place that heavy an emphasis on nudity. They're more about like, violence and crime and rampages. And once again, it's like a good old-fashioned either Southern or Western Gothic atmosphere, and they're an absolute blast. And then in the late 60s, we have the transition into color, where his movies start to change. And this is a little bit of his attempt to kind of go Hollywood. But these movies include Good Morning and Goodbye, Finders, Keepers, Lovers, Weepers, Vixen, which was just one of the biggest hits of his career, and Shari, Harry, and Raquel. That quartet, not quite as good as the Gothic Quartet, but still well worth watching, especially Vixen and Shari, Harry, and Raquel, which opens the door to the biggest opportunity of his career to work for Fox when he made Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
Recently, 20th Century Fox had 2 great ideas: to make a film called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and to get Russ Meyer to write, produce, and direct it.
and it made piles of money for Fox, but Fox was so embarrassed by it and the critical backlash that they kind of like pretended like they wanted to have nothing to do with it. But it is a monster movie. It's the one time you get to see what would Russ Meyer do with a big, giant, colossal budget. And then you've got Russ Meyer's period in the cultural wasteland where he had 2 flops in a row, which are kind of tough to sit through. Even as someone who really loves Russ Meyer, I struggle to watch The 7 Minutes and Black Snake. But then we finally come back for his major career comeback in the latter part of his career, which begins with Supervixens and then goes into Up and Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens. And all 3 of those movies are an absolute blast. Up's a little bit more chaotic and deranged. It almost seems like Russ Meyer, after the success of Supervixens, went completely insane. And I get it. If I made a movie for $100,000 and it grossed $17 million, I'd probably go stark raving nuts as well. So Up is very uneven, but it definitely has its moments. But Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens, it occupies a unique place in my life, because when I went to see it with a couple of friends back in 2014, we had so much fun watching it that we ended up putting a podcast together called Wrong Reel. And it's because of Wrong Reel that I got excited to start dabbling in YouTube. So all roads lead back to Russ Meyer. This channel would not exist if not for that evening where I saw Beneath the Valley of the Ultra Vixens with a few friends over at the Anthology Film Archive here in Manhattan, which got the ball rolling for me doing any sort of like online commentary of any kind. And I feel like that's the best place to bring this video to a close. I hope you enjoyed this lengthy rant. I'm sure a lot of people are going to say, dude, you're totally full of shit. You just like his movies because of the boobs. And maybe so, but I hope I've made a case that there's a lot more going on in his movies than just titillation. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And if you enjoyed this video, I will come back for more Russ Meyer videos in the future. But thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.